Good morning, Alan. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How you doing?
Good, man. So good to see you for the first time in person. Actually, we've never actually met before.
No.
About 5 minutes ago. So cool. We know each other. I'm in your book club, like your street team and all that stuff, and we have some mutual friends, but we've actually never got a chance to meet. So we are going to learn a lot about each other today.
Absolutely. Which really speaks volumes, just the power of the digital world and social media, that you can kind of feel like you know somebody even though you've never actually met them. So
Yeah.
This is a cool experience for me as well.
Yeah, awesome, Alan. So let's get into it. So we got about an hour here. So why don't you introduce yourself, where you are in the world, and just tell the audience who you are.
Well, geographically, I'm in Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is a suburb 30 minutes north of Washington, D.C. On a more macro level, I'm a 44-year-old amicably divorced father of 3 kids. I've got twin sons that will be 10 this coming March, and I've got a daughter that will be 8 in June. By trade, I'm a professional speaker, and that's as of the last 4 years, but I spent almost 20 years in the direct basketball training space as a basketball performance coach.
Nice.
So,
I'm excited.
Is that a good enough intro?
That's great, Alan. That's great. I'm a big sports guy as well. So we'll talk about my sports woes at some point today, I'm sure, because I'm from Minnesota originally.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've had the ultimate success. And I also grew up a huge NBA fan, Timberwolves fan.
Oh yeah.
So so I'm excited to talk to you about that. So how we met. Exactly. So how we met, Alan and I know each other through our mutual friend, Howie Craw, who I've had on the show as well. So that's how we know each other. We also did the same public speaking program, not in the same cohort. I believe, what cohort were you in?
So this would have been fall of 2016 is when I did the first HPS, Heroic Public Speaking Live. And this was back before they had their headquarters in Lambertville, New Jersey. They held it down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And it was a pretty massive event. There was about 300 of us there. And
wow.
That was my real first taste of Michael and Amy in person. I had already read Michael's book, Steal the Show, but that was my first introduction in person. Absolutely loved it. 2 years later, I did a program called the A-Listers, where there was 10 of us that came in for 3 days, and it was kind of like an intense speaking boot camp. For 3 straight days, we all would work on certain material and so forth. So I'm a huge fan of Amy and Michael, and I'm the one that introduced Howie to them, and I try to send as many people through them as possible, even people that don't want to be professional speakers. I tell CEOs and coaches that this will just help you articulate your message with more polish and more influence and impact. So I'm a big believer in them.
Yeah, me too. I did HPS, Heroic Public Speaking, live in October of 2018.
Nice.
So I met like Michael Hudson there. I met some of the people that we know together. And then I had already signed up for grad. So I was in grad 7, which started in November of 2018. Yep. And that's where I was in the same cohort as Howie.
Absolutely.
So that's super cool. So this is the part of the show that's always really fun with somebody that I don't really know, and I only know through social media. So first impressions of each other. And by the way, for the audience, Alan and I are looking at each other on video, so we get some impressions of visual as well. Yes. But because it's my show, Alan, I want you to go first. So what was your first impression of me in any way that means to you?
Well, before we even clicked and I clicked the Zoom link, I really applaud and appreciate your follow-up and your attention to detail. You were incredibly easy to communicate with. First of all, to get this on the schedule, which is not always easy. We've got 2 guys that are pretty busy. And I don't know how much of your follow-ups were automated, but that part doesn't matter. I mean, you made this process really easy for me. So I knew, if nothing else, I was working with a pro, and I was working with someone that this was going to be an enjoyable experience with.
Nice.
And certainly in the 9 minutes that we've known each other now, you've certainly lived up to that. So it's been a very, very favorable first impression for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. The secret is it is automated. Surprise. No, it is, but I'm a tech guy, right? For me, automation is everything. I can't remember it's Alan at this. So thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And I really try and make it as seamless as possible so we get to come on and connect and have a good time. So cool. Absolutely. So my first impression of you, the first time I heard about you is through Howie, when I believe you had just released your book, Raise the Game, which we'll probably talk a little bit about today. And I read the book. It was awesome. Any book that's like performance, but also like has all the sports stuff, I'm like, yes. Sports stories and anecdotes about all the cool people we'll probably talk a little bit about today. And then, I started following you on social media. And my impression of you from your social media is you're like really, really funny and very authentic. Like the things you post, it's like joking, like some speakers, it's like them on a stage and it's like this super serious thing. It's like you have like the perfect mix of like, hey, like here's the room I'm going to be presenting to today. It's got 300 people. This is cool. And like, here's me with my kids. Here's me making a joke about like this GIF that's like not like actually the thing I'm doing. So I think you have the good mix of like, you just feel very authentic on social media, which I strive for as well, because it wasn't always like that. So yeah, that's my first impression of you.
Well, you know what I'll say, of course, because I can tell we're going to have a deep, vulnerable chat.
Of course.
My sense of humor actually skews heavily dark and heavily politically incorrect. Like the movies and the stand-up comedians that I think are the funniest are really inappropriate. And the reason I say that that's funny is, I mean, like, that's the stuff that makes me laugh. And in small, safe, close environments where I know everyone, that tends to be my sense of humor as well. But I clearly understand that when I have a platform like social media, and the whole reason I'm on social media is to fill other people's buckets and to be more inclusive. I don't ever want to be divisive. I don't feel like I'm that funny on social media because that type of stuff is just such a small smidgen of what I actually think is funny. And I know that, if I were to take clips from the funniest stand-up acts or movies and put them on social media, I'd get in a lot of hot water and I'd probably lose a lot of gigs because of the volatile nature of it. But I've always found that funny because the stuff I put on there, I might give a little chuckle, but the stuff that gives me a really good belly laugh is pretty messed up.
Well, I mean, part of your target market who you speak to are like kids sports teams. So that would make sense. You're going to keep it a little above the line with that. You and I will get along great. I'm also I'm a huge fan of dark comedy, like the not the weirder, but like I'm a big fan of all that stuff too. So maybe we'll share a little bit today so we don't totally alienate our audience.
That sounds great. I love it.
That's awesome, Alan. Well, let's get into it because I know we got a ton to talk about today.
Sure.
So first question for you, Alan, is what is something that you nerd out about?
Ooh, nerd out about. I guess the biggest thing is I've just always been on this personal development, the self-help track. I mean, well before social media, I mean, I can think of a few books that were incredibly influential to me in early adulthood. And I've just always been attracted to that space. I mean, even to this day, and I don't know how many of your listeners know who Jim Rohn is. Jim Rohn was kind of a mentor to Tony Robbins and was like one of the first quote unquote motivational speakers. You had Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and Earl Nightingale and folks that started well before I was even born. And I still listen to Jim Rohn stuff today. I was actually listening to a YouTube video of him this morning when I was doing some prep. And I'm fascinated by, and I nerd out on the fact that stuff he said 40 years ago is just as, if not more applicable today than it's ever been. And I find that fascinating. And I certainly hope that, and I don't put myself in the same category as the Jim Rohn, but
you can
if
you want to.
The stuff I share today is still going to be applicable and relevant to people 10, 20, 30 years from now. That the seeds I'm planting with my own children today, I hope when they're adults, they find enough value in it that they plant it with their children. Because I've always geeked out and nerded out on consistency and longevity. And two things that pop into mind right now. I know a lot of people had mixed emotions about Shakira and J-Lo's performance at the Super Bowl. It's not even about that. You're talking about J-Lo has been relevant in pop culture for 30 years.
Totally.
I first saw her when she was a fly girl on In Living Color way back in the day. And here she is, still relevant enough that the biggest stage literally in the world wants her to perform 30 years after she cracked into the industry. And then a couple nights ago was the Oscars, and they asked Eminem to perform a song that he performed 17 years ago or released 17 years ago.
Absolutely.
And to me, that I geek out on anyone that has that type of longevity, because especially in an industry like music or Hollywood, or I know we'll talk about sports, to be able to have that longevity. And that's when you can throw in a Tom Brady or, unfortunately, the late Kobe Bryant. I mean, guys that were able to stay at the peak of their career and the best of the best for 20 years just absolutely blows my mind. And that's something, the personal development and high performance and high achievement in any area of life is something I've always geeked out on.
Yeah. I was going to, speaking of vulnerability, so I'm not surprised by that, because one of the things, first of all, follow Alan on social media on all his channels. It's great stuff. you are very vocal about the amount of time you fast and the amount of time you meditate, which is super intimidating for somebody like me who like, I like meditating, but it's like not, what is your streak now? Is it over 700 days in a row or something?
Oh yeah, it was 934, I think, of this morning. But you know what I'll say real quick, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I do want you to finish that thought. Is one thing I do hope we dive into is the dangers of playing the comparison game, because where you may see that and go, oh my God, I can't believe Alan, he fasts 16 to 18 hours a day most days, or he's meditated 10 minutes a day for 900 plus days. I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Tom Bilyeu, the gentleman that started Quest Nutrition and now has started Impact Theory. And once a year, he does a 5-day fast. He has nothing but water for 5 days. Yes, that's exactly what I said.
That sounds miserable.
Well, so here I am thinking, 18 hours, fasting 18 hours and eating for 6 a day is pretty good. Then I hear a guy that goes 5 days intentionally without food. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that's next level. So just remember that there's going to be people that will always look to you and think what you're doing might be unattainable, but you're probably looking at other people thinking what they do is unattainable, and it creates this full circle. So I work really hard to try not to play the comparison game, because I don't ever want to feel bad about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great stuff, Alan. So this thing, I think,
have you tried meditation and fasting?
No, I do. No, I meditate. I meditate every day for.
Oh, nice.
I set the intention to do 15 minutes a day. I use Muse, the little headset thing, because I'm a tech guy and I'm a big gamification person. I'm competitive. So it shows me like how much relaxed, how much neutral, and how much active. And so I'm a very, very high energy person. My mind is moving 1,000,000 miles a minute most of the time. And when I first started, I don't know if this was your experience, I was like, dude, this sucks. I'm like, I can't even sit there for 2 minutes. I'm like twitching around. And now it's like, I look forward to it. And I sit there and I'm like completely calm. And if you would have met me 5 years ago and be like, this dude sits still for 15 minutes, you're like, no effing way. But I do it. So for example, this morning, and I have a 4-year-old daughter. I was home by myself this morning. She was still sleeping, and it's like 6:30. I'm like, this is great. I just sat up in the living room, meditated, thought about the day, thought about our interview, thought about the things I'm going to be doing tonight and what I want to create in my world over the next, thing as I'm an entrepreneur. And it's just like, it flies by now. And the thing I would say for me, my experience of meditation is, it's like playing a sport. You got to practice it. You can't be like, I'm going to go from 0 to like 15 minutes. Like, no, like start with 30 seconds, go to a minute, go to 2 minutes. And all the apps that are out there, I think you use Headspace. You use Headspace,
I use
right?
Headspace, yeah.
Perfect. So this episode sponsored by Headspace. Like those apps will help you get started. They'll help you walk the 1 minute, 2 minute, and lead you up, just like you're doing a push-up challenge or a plank challenge or anything else. So very cool. I love meditating. Yeah.
And very similar to what you said there, it's also, the cumulative effect. I mean, we've had very similar experiences. The first few times I did it, it was torturous. And that really humbled me, because I didn't realize how reliant I was just on stimulation, that I always needed to be looking at something or listening or like sitting alone with nothing but my breath was really uncomfortable. And that was a major red flag to me, because that should not be uncomfortable. In fact, if you really think about it logically, that should be the most comfortable thing that you do every day, is just be in a quiet space with yourself, just connected to breath or thought or whatever you want. And so that really bothered me that I couldn't do it. So I'm like you, I'm very competitive. And I said, all right, I have to be able to do this. I'm embarrassed by the fact that I can't sit by myself for 10 minutes in silence. So that was one portion. But the other thing that I want to make sure people understand, like anything, going and meditating one time for 10 minutes won't do anything for you. But I'm living proof that meditating one time for 10 minutes, 930 straight times in a row, will make a profound impact on a variety of areas. I mean, similar to what you just said, I've always been very high energy, very quick thinker, very fast talker, and I've calmed down tremendously over the last few years. Like, I'm much more mindful and peaceful, and I'm not a yogi by any means. I'm not a Tibetan monk. I'm still a hard driver, but now I'm just much calmer. And I attribute a lot of it to Headspace. Like, it would almost be impossible for someone to rattle me or fluster me these days, because I'm in just such control of myself. Now, there's plenty of things that can happen that might throw me for a loop for a quick second or might frustrate me, but not to the degree that it used to. I just feel so much more at peace and calm. And it's because that's how I choose to start my day every day. And I started noticing a difference, I don't know, about 90 days into it. I could just tell that I was starting each day with a better mindset and perspective. And now that's fortified tenfold now that it's, I'm approaching 1,000 straight days.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And we're going to move on in a second, but I also will bet that your speaking has improved tremendously from being more calm on the stage, like being more Zen. Like everybody wants to hear a Zen speaker. Nobody wants to hear some people do. It's like the frenetic speaker energy. Like, whoa, that's a lot.
Well, the hardest part for me, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, I did not have near as many communication skills when I was a younger coach. When I was a coach, and now keep in mind, most of my time was in a gym or in a weight room, and most of my time was with adolescent males who are not known categorically as the best listeners in the world. So
that's
really,
true.
I only knew two things when it came to coaching when I first started: loud and louder. Those were the only two. That was all I knew, and I would get really intense and almost drill sergeant like. And I noticed that when I first started doing the professional speaking, that I would default to what I call coach voice very quickly. That when I was trying to emphasize a point, I only did it by getting louder and more intense. Yeah. And that's the exact opposite you want to be with most corporate audiences. So I had to learn, and this is why HPS was so influential to me. I had to learn to play other instruments when it came to my voice, and that I can actually emphasize a point to a greater degree by saying it softly, or by having a longer pause in between, or inflecting in between. So I've really worked hard over these last few years to try to develop all of the different tools in my toolbox to become a better speaker. But yes, I'm so much calmer on stage now, and I'm more comfortable speaking slowly. I used to think that I had to speak as fast as possible because if I just kept my mouth moving, my brain would never shut off. And now I can actually enjoy a 3 or 4 second pause on stage, which, as Amy and Michael will say, might feel like an eternity to you as the speaker, but it's absolute perfection to the people that are listening.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I was like, I feel like I should do a 3 to 4 second pause right now, but that feels too long. So you got me, Alan. You got me. That's hilarious. That's great. So you obviously have a large comfort zone, like things that you're always wanting to explore and push yourself. So I'm curious if there's something that is outside of your comfort zone that might be inside of somebody else's.
Yeah, without question. I mean, when I think of all of it, now I don't believe in regret, and I know that there's no mulligans on life. There are no do-overs. But when I look back, if there was one thing that I wish I would have had a different seed planted early, I grew up with a very conservative mindset. I had very, very limiting beliefs. And I don't say that to be disparaging. I just, for some reason, I didn't believe many of the things that people attain today were even possible. I had, what I like to say is I played small. Now with that, I was successful in almost everything I attempted, which here's where my mindset was messed up. I thought that was a good thing. I was like, man, I'm batting 900. I'm doing really well. What I didn't realize was what that actually meant was I wasn't stretching enough and I wasn't pushing enough. And I was playing it so safe and playing it so small that I should have had some much bigger failures or adversities or challenges, and I didn't. So that's really what I've tried to rewire myself over the last 5 or 6 years is play much bigger, take much bigger calculated risks, lean into some fears and some insecurities that I've had for, most of my life. Yeah. And I'm still way off from where I want to be, but I'm better than I used to be. And that's what's most important. And a perfect example would be, 5 years ago, if you were to say, hey, Alan, I'm signing up for this 100-mile road race. I'm going to run 100 miles on foot in 24 hours. Do you want to join me? 5 years ago, my initial gut response would have been, oh, I can't do that. Jason, there's no way I could run 100 miles. I can't do it. I tried a marathon one time. It was really hard. There's no way I could do 4 times. And I would have lost before I even gave it a try. Yeah. Now I'm much closer to saying, wow, that's interesting, Jason. Let me think about that for a second. Let me try to process that because that might be something I want to try. So I still haven't rewired myself to the point where I'm like, all right, man, let's do it. But I'm better than I used to be. And I think that if I can limit these limiting beliefs, it opens up so many doors. But while that might be a journey that I'll be on for the rest of my life, what I'm working really hard to do is plant that seed with my children now. Is plant the seed that I wish I would have had planted in me and let them know, you can't be anything you want to be. You can be anything you deserve to be. And here's some of the traits you need to deserve whatever it is that you want. And
love that.
That's where I think I can make the biggest difference. If I could put 3 people out into the world that don't have limiting beliefs, maybe that'll overcome the fact that I've had them for a while.
Yeah, I completely identify with your story, and I've actually had pretty limiting beliefs until about, I don't know, a year and a half ago. So it actually took me a long time because I kind of had this career that it was great, but it was kind of easy in a way, and I never really stretched myself. It never felt like I was stretching myself. And now that I'm a full-time coach and entrepreneur and doing all of these things, now I'm like, whoa, I've like greatly expanded my ability to be with failure, because I worked in sales for 19 years. So, you don't really get to fail that much before you don't have a job anymore. So it's all very calculated, and there's a lot of systems and processes. So I totally identify with all that. I also grew up in an environment, not really my parents so much, but just like, this is my natural, no, like that feels like too scary, or it's not something I'm interested in. But I'm actually, I do improv. So for me, like the whole yes, and it's like, oh, like 100-mile race. So that is something I would say no to, because I fucking hate running.
Yes.
I love cycling, hate running. So like, for me, it's like, I'm not committed to running, so I'm not going to do it. But I'm also somebody who's now saying yes to more and more, which is so fascinating. And one of the themes on this show that you always get when I meet high achievers, high performers like yourself is, growing up always like, oh, like kids, you do everything. And then as you get older, you get stuck in your ways. I'm actually finding the opposite. When I'm interviewing people on here that are, kind of in the second phase of their career or their life, they've gone out and they're doing their own things. They're like, people are actually taking on more. And I don't know if that's a generational thing. I don't know if it's 2020 and more is available to us, but it's really cool to see when I interview people that are like in their 50s, even in their 60s, that are like doing these really cool new things. It's really cool to see.
No, that's awesome. And you know what I'd say is, with the 100-mile race analogy, to me, the key now, you absolutely have the right to say, I don't want to run 100 miles, but I just hope that you don't have the mindset, I can't run 100 miles. Yeah. So it turns from being from being a limitation to a choice. And that's what's most important. See, for me, there's so many of those big things that I would have said can't. And like, I've met people that have run 100 miles. I'm physically capable of running 100 miles if they are. They aren't born with any more physical tools than I have been. So I can't say can't, but you can say won't. And to me, that's a very powerful, it might sound like semantics and verbal sleight of hand to some people, but that's very powerful. And that's even language that I instill with my kids. Like, I ask them to do something and they say, I can't. And I say, oh, no, you can. Now you can say you won't, or you don't feel like it, but I want you to own the language that you're putting out there. So these are all things in my own life that I've really tried to make progress and improve. And that's the other thing is I also try not to get stifled by perfection, but be much more inspired by progress. So as I said, I have less limiting beliefs today than I had a year ago. And I hope if you and I connect on another podcast a year from now, I'll have even fewer then. So as long as I'm moving in the right direction, then I can be at peace with that.
No, I love that, Alan.
The Talking to Cool People podcast is brought to you by Jason Frizzell Coaching. Jason works with amazing people who are looking to find and develop their passion and purpose and create their journey to wherever it is they want to go. Check us out at jasonfrizzell.com, Facebook, or on Instagram. Jason loves hearing from anyone who thinks it would be cool to connect, to be coached, or to be a guest on our show. Email him at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com or DM him on Facebook and Instagram. And now, back to some more amazing conversation on Talking to Cool People.
So moving on to the next question I have for you. You are literally a professional speaker. You get paid to get on big stages and deliver messages to people all the time. What would you speak on if I gave you 5 minutes and you got to give a speech to the world? What would you talk about for 5 minutes and why?
The 2 things I'm most passionate about are improving performance and happiness. And those 2 are actually very directly correlated. So I would give a talk on those 2 because I found that when we perform higher in any area of our life, whether it's speaking, writing, podcasting, coaching, parenting, whatever it is, when we perform at a higher level, we feel better about ourselves. Our self-value and self-worth and confidence goes up. And I've also found there's a direct correlation between that and confidence. We are all more confident when we feel good about ourselves through demonstrated performance. So I think a lot of people think I need to be successful to be happy, when in fact it's the exact opposite. You need to be happy in order to be successful. So on some level, I would give a 5-minute talk underneath that umbrella.
I love that. Are both of those speeches that you've already written and you actually give as in a longer form? Do you actually have that content in your speeches
to some
today?
degree?
Nice.
Most everything I talk about on the corporate space is under the umbrella of improving performance. And under that, you have different silos like leadership and accountability and culture. But the common thread through all of it that I don't really advertise in the description, but I talk about every single talk or workshop or training is the happiness thread. And people talk all the time about dividing personal and professional and having this work-life balance.
Yeah.
And that construct doesn't work for me. I think as human beings, we're all integrated. So I tell folks, look, I'm going to share with you some proven strategies and principles today that will make you better at your job. No question. But I want you to smile because these things are also going to help you in your personal life. That everything I share with you today is going to make you a better spouse, make you a better sibling, make you a better parent, make you a better leader in your community or church or whatever you may do. So these things have very high utility. And that's where all of this stuff is correlated. I mean, success and happiness and fulfillment, there's a direct tie between them. Improving work and improving home, there's a direct tie between those things. And to me, that's what's most important. And I use happiness and fulfillment as my number one guiding light with everything that I do. And then I've noticed, not coincidentally, as happiness and fulfillment has gone up, so has success. And I know this statement may turn some people off because it sounds like it lacks humility.
Bring it.
I'm the most successful I've ever been in my life right now. And I'm also the happiest and most fulfilled that I've ever been right now. These things are all tied together. And I know success is usually one of those words where people get a little off put if you say that about yourself. But since I tie mine to happiness, I have no problem saying that. And I noticed that I didn't say I have financial success. I didn't say I have certain accolades, or has nothing to do with that. I do what I consider to be meaningful work. I aim to serve and help as many people as possible. I have deep connected relationships with the people that mean the most to me, and I'm having so much fun doing it. To me, all of that means I'm successful, and I'm okay with that.
No, absolutely. So as I'm listening to you, two things. One, the whole, I'm so with you on the work-life balance thing. And I actually get this when people are like, hey, so what kind of coaching do you do? Do you do business coaching or career coaching? And I go, I do holistic coaching, because within an hour of meeting somebody and you're talking, yes, people are generally like, oh, I want to get promoted or I want to leave my job or something. But within like a half hour, it's like, how's it going at home? How's it going as a parent? How's it going as a spouse? How's it going in your friendships? How's it going in your spirituality? Like you said, all the things. Like, man, we're just like, it's so ingrained. And the fact is, if you work for somebody else, you've got this device attached to your hip that's got email and Slack and instant messaging and all that stuff on it. You're connected all the time. This work-life balance thing, I think, is quickly shifting. So for you, it sounds like listening through my coach years, your greatest commitment is happiness. I have something very similar. I think we actually have something very similar. My greatest commitment over the last really 8 months is fun. And so I look at everything I do. So my saying is, if it ain't fun, I ain't doing it. So if I wasn't having fun creating this podcast, I wouldn't do it. If I wasn't having fun in my coaching business, I wouldn't do it. If I wasn't having, parenting, I would do that anyway. But like, how do we make this fun? What would it look like if it was fun? And I stole this from Tim Ferriss, where I don't know if are you a Tim Ferriss fan?
Huge fan.
Yeah, I figured so. He's quite the performance person as well. He has a saying. I don't know if you ever heard this. He wrote an article when he wrote his book Tools of Titans. He was overwhelmed. He was stressed because he's like, I got 100 people I got to go and interview and like collect all their stuff. And he was like overwhelmed, and he had a breakthrough moment where he asked himself, what would it look like if this was easy? And then he did it from ease. So for me, like everything I run into, it's like, what would it look like if doing this podcast was fun? Which the podcast is fun, but like, what would it look like if this thing that I don't like doing actually was fun? How do I make a game of it? How do I entertain myself with it? So for me, like I'm firmly committed to fun. And I think that's such a cool, and I think yours and I is pretty much the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. I think you and I, we probably, if we were to expand our definitions, I bet there's tremendous overlap between how we define fun and how we define happiness. And if nothing else, they're at least linked at the hip. And what you just
Yeah.
shared about Tim reminds me, and I don't know who originally said this, or I would give them credit, but it's turn your have tos to get tos. You know, you
Yeah,
don't have to
exactly.
record this podcast. You get
Right.
to record this podcast. And I certainly didn't have to be a guest. I
That's
get
right.
to be a guest, and I'm
Right.
excited for that. And, you know, I think with any of those things, it's the mindset at which we choose to approach it is incredibly helpful. And
Yeah,
the
that's
happiness and the fun guide, I just think is so important. And it's also important to know, to make sure that you've got kind of a deeper definition of it. You know, I also link happiness and fulfillment together. There's certainly things that will give one pleasure. You know, sleeping in can give somebody pleasure. Eating a chocolate chip cookie, something of a sexual nature. Like there's short-term pleasure, which I'm not opposed to by any means, but that I also don't want folks to think I'm confusing that with happiness. I'm
Right.
talking about esoterically, like just feeling good, feeling like things are fun. Like I'm thankful that I get to go do this. You know, there are very few places I'd rather be outside of with my own children than on a stage in front of an audience that I feel like I can serve. And especially if I've done my due diligence where I know that I'm prepared, I am so excited to get on stage and start to share stuff that I believe they'll find helpful. Because for me personally, again, outside of anything that I do with my children, I can't think of a bigger high than when I say something and I see somebody in the audience either look at me and nod or look at their paper and write it down like they're writing a note down. That gives me almost an intoxicating high, and I love that. And I want to do as much of that as possible because plenty of people have poured into me and given me things that have caused me to nod my head and write down. So the ability to do that for others, I absolutely love it. And so the reason I'm saying that is that makes me really happy and fulfilled to do that.
Absolutely.
And I'm doing it at a higher level now than I've ever done it, which means by definition, I'm getting more successful at the professional speaking craft and trade.
Amazing.
And I take pride in that, and I love it.
Yeah, congrats, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So this is actually a good segue into the part of the show where you get to share your journey to today, and don't mean like today here in mid-February, just like what led you to professional speaking, what you're up to today, and like whatever you'd like to share with the audience at this point.
Well, let me start with, so basketball was my first identifiable passion. It's the first thing that I can remember really loving outside of my parents. And I fell in love with the game at probably 4 or 5 years old. And while I was a very active child and I tried every sport and activity under the sun, I always came back to basketball. It was always my favorite. So I was able to play in high school, was able to play in college. When the writing was on the wall that I was not going to be able to play competitively after college, I just knew that I wanted to stay in the game. And at that time, I started to develop an equal affinity for performance training, or as it was called then, strength and conditioning. And I figured, hey, if I can combine my old love of basketball with my new love of performance training, that might be the greatest job in the history of the world. I mean, talk about happiness. Yes.
Yeah.
And I jumped right in.
Yeah. No. So I had a question for you. What did you play? What was your position?
So I was a point guard, but I
figured so. Yeah.
I was a shoot first point guard. So those they weren't really in high demand. You know, I'm supposed to be passing the ball and be a facilitator. And I just thought, hey, I've already got the ball in my hands. I think I'll go ahead and jack it up from here.
You're like basically like a Kyrie Irving point guard.
Yes, minus the athleticism and skills that he has. Yes,
minus the All Pro. Yes.
Yes. Other than that, we're basically identical.
Same net worth. Same thing. Yeah.
Everything else is identical. Yeah. So, and I lived in that space for over 15 years and found it incredibly fulfilling. You know, it really shifted from most of my focus was pouring into players at first, and then that transitioned into pouring into coaches so that they could train their players. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of that. And then about 4 years ago, I was just ready for a change. I don't want to be overly dramatic and say I was burned out, but I can see myself heading towards burnout, and I wanted to jump off the ship before that thing sank. So
that's great.
That I just wasn't as passionate about sets and reps and exercises and training protocols. I was much more passionate about the stuff we're talking about now, and I decided to make that leap to the corporate space. And, you know, I still consider myself a performance coach. I just don't coach teenage boys on how to improve athleticism. I coach folks in the business world on how to improve their performance, happiness, culture, and so forth. So it's really just been a long continuation of reinventing myself and finding iterations of what I'm most passionate about And then that's where I steer. And, people always ask me, where do I see myself in 5 years or 10 years? And I don't know. I mean, I know that right now I'm so committed to becoming the best professional speaker and author that I'm capable of. That's all I see now. And
Amazing.
I don't know that that's attainable, but I don't know if I'll still feel that way 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, who knows? But I don't feel the need to put an ending time on it. I will do this until I don't feel like I'm serving audiences or I don't feel like I'm growing anymore. At present, I don't see any expiration on this. I could see me doing this for the next 30 years and still be really happy and fulfilled, but I don't know. And I won't go against the grain. If 5 years from now I wake up and my heart's in a different place, hopefully I've developed the skill sets and the value and the relationships that will allow me to pivot into anything else that I would choose to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've got 2 follow-up questions. It's actually the same question, but it's for 2 different audiences that you've served. So I know in the past, and you talk a lot about this in your book and through social media, you've gotten to spend a lot of time with some of the greatest basketball players ever to play the game.
Yes.
So I'm curious if you'd share with us what your opinion or what your experience is like. What do they have in common? Like, I know you spent time with like Team USA players, like gold medal winning teams. You mentioned Kobe Bryant before. Like, what's the thing that the greatest athletes that you know have in common? Besides,
there's a big 3. The first is they have an absolute undying passion for that game or that craft. I mean, they don't just play basketball because they have the natural talent to be good at basketball. They play basketball because they love the game. So first and foremost, in a relentless passion. Number 2 is, and this is what I learned directly from Kobe the first time I met him, they all have a profound respect and appreciation for the basics and the fundamentals.
Yeah.
They don't try to skip steps. They understand that even when they've been in the NBA for 15 years, that they need to keep working towards mastery of the basics and the fundamentals. And to me, that is so important because we live in a world now that's often telling us we should be looking for shortcuts and hacks, that we should always be on the search for what's new and what's sexy and what's shiny. But the basics work, and they always have, and they always will. And then the last thing, they do a brilliant job of blending confidence with humility. They're all very confident in what they do. Most of those guys, if you ask them who's the best player in the world, every one of them would say me. Not me, Alan Stein. They'd say me in the front. But they believe they are the best because they've put in the work to deserve the best. So their confidence is at an all-time high. However, they still have the humility that allows them to be coachable, and they're always looking for ways to get better. So if they believe that you have something you can share with them that will get them better, then they're completely open to it. So they blend that confidence with humility. And when you take that to an obsession over mastering the basics and an undying passion for what they do, that's kind of the recipe for being elite.
Yeah. Second question for you, and you can pass on this if you want to. I don't think you will, but I'm curious. What's your all-time All-NBA team, top 5? Like at each, like who would you put if you could pick anybody who's ever played the game? Who would you put on your squad?
And you want me to go by position?
Yeah, go by position.
Magic Johnson at the 1, Michael Jordan at the 2. I guess, am I allowed to put LeBron at the 3? I guess he could be a 3 because he
plays everything.
High utility. Yeah. I'd put Tim Duncan at the 4. And I know this is going to bother a lot of people. I'll probably put Shaq at the 5. And I'm not disregarding Kareem or Wilt Chamberlain or Bill Russell. I just heavily skew towards more recent players than older players because I think the game has progressed to the point that today's players are the best we've ever seen. Now, would Michael Jordan have been just fine playing in today's NBA? Yes, he would have managed to be fine, and so would Bird and Magic. But generally speaking, the game has gotten better. And not that you even asked, but when I make the comparison, Wilt Chamberlain was phenomenal. I mean, he was a world-class athlete. He was so dominant. But when you look at who he matched up against every single night, he's going up against Bill Russell, and then the other 20 games, he's going up against somebody that's like 6'2". So his stats are a little bit skewed. Right. In his heyday, Shaq is playing against a 7-footer every single night. And, even to his credit, I do think Michael Jordan is the best player to ever play the game. Mm-hmm. However, when people like to make the comparison between LeBron and Jordan, like Jordan, a third of his games, he had all NBA players guarding him. Totally. The other third of his games, he's matched up with Craig Elo. no disrespect.
Right.
Whereas LeBron is going up against phenomenal players, on all 30 teams. So
Yes.
the competition makes a difference. But I think I would do pretty well with Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Tim Duncan, and Shaq. I think that'd be a pretty decent team. And
that's a decent team.
Greg Popovich would be the coach. And I think that'd be a pretty good squad.
Yeah, I would agree with all of those. I think that's a pretty good basketball team. Well, awesome, Alan. Thanks for sharing your journey. That was really interesting. And like I was saying earlier, I'm learning a ton about you since I didn't know this about you before. So This is the time where you maybe get to know a little bit more about me. So this is at Jason AMA. So Alan, what would you like to ask me about?
Oh boy. What was your impetus for actually starting the podcast? What made you want to start a show?
Yep. So fun. I mentioned earlier, fun.
Yes.
So the actual impetus is when I was growing up, I wanted to be an athlete. I was a tennis player. So I wanted to be, at the time, Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi were my guys. I'm at just a couple of years younger than you. So, I was born in the 70s as well. And then I realized that I was also not going to be a pro tennis player. All conference in high school in Minnesota does not equate to, going on to playing bigger stages. Right. So the other thing that I always had this like secret desire for, but I never explored, I wanted to be Johnny Carson. And then I wanted to be Jay Leno. I wanted to have my own talk show. And here we are at the age of 42. I have my own talk show, and it happens to be called a podcast. So for me, and I remember this, I was on a podcast called Jim's Revolution in October of last year, October of 2019. And it was a fun podcast, and I was a guest on there. It was about people who have made career changes and also had to do with technology. It was kind of like this cool mix. I was a perfect guest for it. And we got done, and I was like, I was talking to my coach like 2 days later, and he's like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, "I'm going to start a podcast." He's like, "Okay." And I'm like, "No, I'm going to start a podcast." He's like, "What by when?" Because, as a coach, performance coach, like, "What by when? When are you going to do it?" And I'm like, "I'm going to launch it January 6th. He's like, "Okay." He's like, "What do you need?" I'm like, "Nothing. I'm going to go do this." And I went and did it. Like, awesome. I knew nothing about podcasting on October 15th. And then January 5th, I launched, and I've recorded. This will be my 35th episode that I've recorded. And I've got a batch of another 100 people on the list. So the reason I did it, man, because it is so much fun. Like, I'm a complete extrovert, and I love interesting people. And for me to have this avenue and this forum to get to talk to people like Alan, who we don't really know each other. And now we get to have this super cool conversation that now hundreds of people are going to listen to. It's just so fun.
Yeah,
it's so fun.
Awesome.
This podcast, it's just purely for fun, man. That's it. I get people inbound now. They're like, "Hey, I want to connect with you, or could I be on the show?" I had a super cool inbound come in last week. It's the CEO of the company who's trying to bring Major League Baseball to Charlotte, called the Charlotte Bats.
Yeah.
He saw the podcast somehow, and he said, "Hey, I'd love to be on the show." I'm like, that to me is my thing is fun and connection. Those are my two things. I love connecting with people. I'm a complete extrovert. So for me, this is just if I could just podcast, that's all I'd want to do. I mean, that's not true. I love coaching too, but I would love to just podcast all day and talk to amazing people. So that's the impetus for the show. And here we are.
Yes, we are. If there was someone that you could kind of be an apprentice / personal assistant to for 1 year, just so that you could learn kind of their trade and what they do and be a fly on the wall to everything they're privy to, who would you pick?
It's so easy. And
is it?
Yeah. And it's so easy. And I already mentioned it. Tim Ferriss.
Okay.
I'm a big iterator. Yeah. I'm a big experimenter. Hey, let's try this. If it's not working, let's do something else. And I think he's a genius. He's never stuck on anything. It's always hey, I'm going to start this podcast, and I don't know, let me try something different today. Hey, I'm going to microdose of these new vitamins, and let's see what it does to me. As long as it doesn't kill me, I'm good. All his fitness stuff that he did for a while. I'm a big fan of Tim Ferriss. I think the 4-Hour Work Week is just a brilliant concept.
Sure.
For those who haven't read the book, it's not about working 4 hours in a work week. It's about how to work smarter and build passive income. So I think Tim Ferriss, if I could just spend a year hanging out with Tim, I think he's a really likable guy. I think he's one of the inspirations for this show that he does. And I don't know if you've heard him do this, where he will do he'll drink and he'll call people. So he'll have people ask questions, and it'll be at night. He'll drink. So I have a few episodes recorded that are called Talking to Cool People After Dark.
Nice.
And same thing. And we drink. So I've done it with a few people now, and that'll be a format that I'll be continuing. So yeah, I think Tim Ferriss would be the guy. It's either Tim Ferriss or Mark Cuban.
Oh, okay.
I love Mark Cuban because he is fun as hell. He seems fun as hell, but he knows how to switch on the business side, and he just doesn't seem to take himself too seriously. Like I don't take myself seriously at all most of the time.
Right.
Which also makes by the way, guys, makes life way more fun when you don't take yourself too seriously. But I really like him on Shark Tank. I like how he's kind but straight. Mm-hmm. He's concise. He trusts his gut, which is something that I'm finally learning how to do after a long time, and just kind of like, hey, like, just doesn't feel good to me, I'm out. Like, no talking about it, no having to like negotiate with yourself. So I think Tim would be first. I'd love to follow Mark Cuban around, and then I'd love to have tickets to Mavs games. That would be pretty cool as well. But I'd have to move. I guess I'd have to move to Dallas, so I'd have to talk to my wife about that one.
That'd be a pretty good gig, though. I love it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That's awesome.
That's a great question. I've never had that asked.
I was going to say, on par with your other podcast, I'm hammered, blitzed out of my mind right now.
Alan is so hammered. You can't even keep your eyes open. It's great.
But I tell you, that's the type of dark humor that's funny to me. Like
that's hilarious. It's amazing. Yeah.
For me to be completely blitzed at noon, and for the record, anyone listening, I don't drink. That's why it's even funnier to me. But
that's not surprising at all.
That's super cool, man. No, I think those are great answers.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you. So let me get this straight. You fast, you meditate, and you don't drink at noon. And you're because of a performance coach. That would make perfect sense to me.
Those things are definitely in alignment for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I do drink.
The no drinking, I don't have any objection to it, and I've certainly done my share of drinking in the past.
Sure.
I've only drank 2 times in the past year and a half, and those were times that I just decided that I wanted to have an adult beverage. And but what I tried. This has been a year and a half ago. I said, I want to go a few weeks without drinking and just see how I feel. And I did it, and I felt great. And it just kept piggybacking. So it was never like, I never said to myself, I'm never going to drink again. And I have no objection to it. I think there's plenty of benefits of having a glass of red wine every night and so forth.
Sure.
It was just one of those things that I'm always constantly experimenting with myself. Not anywhere close to the degree of a human guinea pig like Tim Ferriss. I mean, the stuff he tries with himself is next level. But when it comes to health and fitness and mind and body, I actually enjoy trying different things. I went vegan for the month of November this past year. I didn't really enjoy it. I find that meat and cheese are 2 things that bring me a lot of happiness. So,
yeah, exactly.
I got off of that quickly, but I was so glad that I tried it and I stuck it out for the full month. And then I could actually say with conviction, this isn't a great fit for me. I'm certainly not going to argue any of the research on whether it's good or bad, but I just realized it was not something that I wanted to sustain for the rest of my life based on things that do make me happy, but at least I was able to try it. So, and to me, within reason, we should all be open to trying different things. That goes back to what we were talking earlier, and I would say to people, well, I'm going to go vegan this month. And the first words out of their mouth were, oh, I could never do that. I can't do that. I'm like, well, yes, you can. You can say you don't want to. And you don't have to. I'm not pressuring you.
Right.
But don't say you can't. Like that.
Exactly.
And I noticed that when other people say can't, it raises my red flags quickly. And yet I used to say it all the time, and it never seemed to bother me.
Yeah, like it's not a choice. It's always a choice. Almost always a choice. Yeah.
Everything is, without question.
Absolutely.
And if the thing itself is not a choice, how we react to it or respond is always up to us. And
that's right.
I find that to be one of the most empowering mindsets we can have.
Oh, absolutely. Cool, Ellen. So enough with a hot seat to me. Back to you. What's the thing that you're most proud of? And I think I know what your answer is going to be, but let's see if you surprise me. What's the thing you're most proud of?
I know it's cliche to say, but I will say my children. I'm proud that I've got 3, and I know every parent thinks they've got good kids. But I've got 3 kids that I have a wonderful connection with. As they're getting older, that connection and relationship starts to change because, as because you're much closer to it now than I was when, your kids are infants and 1 and 2, it's, you just look at how cute they are and they're so reliant on you to do everything for them. Right. And then they start turning into little people and you have at first, which appear to be very cute juvenile conversations. And the next thing you know, my sons are 10 and I'm amazed at some of the stuff that they ask me, some of the stuff that they already know about. And it's really fun. So I'm definitely proud of my children. But to be clear, and I'm very passionate about being an advocate for kids in youth sports. Like I'm not proud of them because of any accomplishments. And honestly, I don't really care what their grades are. I could not care less how many points they score in a game or if they win. I don't care if their teacher puts a star on their artwork. None of that means anything to me. All that matters is the same things that matter to myself. they appear to be happy, fulfilled, well-adjusted kids. They appear to, things are good. And to me, I'm proud that I'm able to hopefully model that behavior for my 3 kids.
Yeah, it's great. I feel like I need a drinking game or like a jar. And every time I interview a parent, which is like 75% of the people I interview,
yes,
literally the words are, I know this is cliched,
yeah,
followed by my kids. Like every parent says that. So I want to share with you really quick and with the audience, my daughter, she just turned 4 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
And she said to me last week, she goes, Daddy, I'm sad. And I said, why? She goes, well, because that helicopter crashed. And then I had to have the conversation because it was all over the news. And we had to, because, they're showing pictures of Kobe and Gianna everywhere. And, like in our house, we live in an apartment. So if it's on TV, it's likely she's going to see it. So we had to have a conversation about what that actually meant. So it was like, that's when, and I'm sure you probably remember those moments when your kids are, you're like, oh, they're actually, she knows some stuff. She's 4. That's an age where you start to pick up a lot of stuff.
Yes. Which is why what we say and what we do and what we model is so, so important. And I mean, I remember it vividly because I was literally sitting here at my office getting a little bit of work done on a Sunday, and I allowed my kids to have some screen time. They were playing on their iPads, and I got a text message that said, did you hear about Kobe? And within 30 seconds, all 3 of them walked in my office, iPad in hand, and said, oh my gosh, Daddy, did you hear about Kobe? So we had to have that conversation. And we've had in-depth conversation. Now, I'm very amicably divorced. So I've had conversations with my children about divorce. We've had conversations about death before the Kobe incident, but we've also had conversations since. We've had to talk and have some pretty deep conversations. And my parenting approach, and this is all it is my own perspective, is I am very, very honest and transparent with my children. I don't talk to them as if they're little children. I talk to them as if they are adults. Now, I say that within reason. I'm not cursing or telling inappropriate jokes with them, but I don't, I choose not to use necessarily flowery language and explain to them. And to me, one of the best things I can do with my children is tell them when there's something that I don't know or that I'm unsure of, or having the vulnerability to let my kids know when I'm sad or when I'm hurt or disappointed. I mean, and I don't want this to go down to a rabbit hole of people's religious or spiritual beliefs, but I personally don't know what happens when someone dies. So I don't tell my children that I know what happens when someone dies. I tell them that, hey, I don't know. Here's some beliefs that I have, and here's some beliefs that other people have, and I want them to make up their own mind, but I don't tell them that I know. And I also let them know that, hey, sometimes me not knowing, that gives me a little bit of anxiety and worry. And I think some people try to shield their children from that because they always want to keep them in this insulated bubble where everything is always great. And there's nothing wrong with, crying or telling, I'm sad that happened to Kobe and his daughter. And I don't know what happens to them. I just believe in being honest. And I think that's one of the reasons that I have a really good connection with my kids, because they know that I'm going to give them the straight dope no matter what. And they might not like what I have to say, and they might disagree with what I have to say, which is always their right, but they don't have to worry about me trying to trick them.
Right. Awesome. So Alan, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. Want to check in with you. You've got about maybe 10 minutes more for us.
That's perfect. Absolutely. That would work. Great.
Awesome, man. It's good because I get to ask you a vulnerability question.
Yeah.
What is something you were afraid might actually be true about you?
Afraid that might be true about me. I mean, there's lots of things that are true about me, and I've just learned to own them. I don't know that I've got anything, any more baggage or any skeletons in the closet that I'm afraid of. Now, I will say there's a big difference between and when I went through some counseling when I was going through my divorce and went to see a therapist. Those two things are night and day, because I had plenty of insecurities and fears then that I would have never told anyone. Like, I was petrified just of being vulnerable. And like unfortunately, like many males, I actually saw vulnerability as a major weakness.
Yeah.
And now I view it the exact opposite. I'm in complete alignment with Dr. Brene Brown's definition that it's courageous to be vulnerable, and that's a sign of strength. So I've got a long list of things that I'm not very good at, that give me a little bit of hesitation and anxiety and fear, but I don't know that, they don't surprise anyone anymore because I just let them all out, and I'm okay with that. And I also have a list of things that that I'm proud of and that I feel good about and that I know that I do really, really well. And, so I make sure there's a balance between the two.
Yeah. So question for you about that. So let's take it back. Let's rewind it. You said there was a time when you were really afraid to be vulnerable. What did you do to compensate for that fear? Or like, what was the output of that on the other side when you were afraid to be vulnerable?
Well, and this was, going through therapy was the conduit to let all of that out. And my therapist was the one that really said, look, there is nothing more freeing in the world than being vulnerable. And I don't know if you and your listeners were prepared for an Eminem 8 Mile reference, but the best, and I don't mean
we're always ready for that.
I don't mean a spoiler alert, a movie that came out 18 years ago, but at the very end, the reason Eminem wins the rap battle is because he goes up there and basically makes fun of himself. He's completely self-deprecating, and he pulls the rug out from the other hip hop guy because he says, here's all the things that you're about to make fun of me for. So I'm just going to tell you what they are, and I'm totally good with them. And that's kind of how I view things now. When I say this stuff in jest, I'm not really a self-deprecating person. I'm very proud of who I am. I like who I am. I've done the internal work to become the best version of who I can be. But I have the humility to acknowledge that I do have plenty of faults and plenty of fears and insecurities, but those don't control me anymore. They used to, and they'd control my decision-making. They'd control my mood, my perspective. Now I'm okay with it. And I know what things that I don't do well. And, I'm smart. I don't necessarily go advertising those. If I'm trying to lock up a speaking engagement, then I'm certainly going to put my best foot forward and tell them the things that I do really, really well. I'm not going to lead with the things that I don't do well. That's just, a sales suicide. But I know what those things are, and I'm okay with them. And the most important part is I don't let them determine my own self-value. Nice. And some of these are super trivial. Like, I'm not very good with tools. I'm not handy at all. Nothing would give me more anxiety than having to put a dresser together from IKEA. Like, I'm miserable at something like that. I'm awful with directions. I have no idea how I navigated this planet before GPS. I did somehow, but I don't know how I did it. So those are two things I'm awful at, and I'm okay with that. Thankfully, there is GPS, and thankfully there are handymen that I can pay $25 to that will put my IKEA dresser together, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. But I remember not necessarily with those two things, but with similar things, I would think, well, if someone finds this out about me, they're not going to like me, or they're not going to think I'm cool, or they're not going to think I'm good enough to be with them, and I would be petrified of it. Now, I'm good with it. And, whether I'm talking about dating, which again, I'm back in the single world because I'm amicably divorced. If someone's looking for someone that's great with directions and great with tools, then I'm not a good fit for them. And I'm okay with that. Just like if someone says, we're looking for a speaker that can talk on cryptocurrency. Okay, well, I'm not your guy. I don't know anything about it. Bitcoin, I can't even wrap my mind around it. That's how infantile I am. So I'm not the best fit, and I'm okay with that. Whereas 10 years ago, I would have tried to be everything to everyone. And I'd say, well, I bet you I can pick up a hammer and pretend I'm good with tools. Let me read up on cryptocurrency tonight so I can at least pretend to have some knowledge of it. And now I just let all that stuff go. I stay in my lane. I do my job to the best of my ability. And I'm in perfect peace with who I am.
That's awesome. Well, that's actually a perfect segue as we're going to wrap up here to talk about where we can find you, where the audience can find you and connect with you. Before we do that, though, I want to spend, if you'd be willing to spend a minute or two talking about your ideal stage, because one of the things we learn in Heroic Public Speaking is what's your ideal stage. So who are you, like what kind of stages are you looking for to speak on? What kind of audiences? You mentioned corporate, like anything more specific you'd want to share there. I'd love to hear that.
The stage that Shakira and J-Lo were just on at the Super Bowl would be a pretty good start for me.
Do you wear that same outfit that they wore, or
if they pay my full Keynote fee, I would at least consider it. Now here's
that would be amazing.
Found. Yeah. First of all, there's two different types of work I do. I do keynoting, at conferences, which is usually an eclectic group of people, and I'm on a stage, and it's more of a one-sided, I'm going to share stuff in one direction for the next hour. But I also do workshops and trainings where it's usually smaller groups. It might be the sales team from a mid-sized business. There's 40 of them, and I'm going to be with them for 3 hours. And then it's more of a dialogue. It's a conversation. I share some things. You guys ask some questions. Let's learn and I'm more of a conductor. And I do equal parts of both because I really enjoy the differences between the two. The big common thread between them is they're usually folks that have some type of position of authority. So I just call them leaders, executives, supervisors, directors, managers. That group tends to resonate with my message. The second group are people in sales. So anyone that sells anything from a product to a service. But if your job is to sell, they tend to resonate with my message and my methodology. And then lastly, are folks kind of in that HR space that are kind of the culture gatekeepers for the business. So those are the three audiences. I thrive on being on big stages. Like I would love to stand on a stage and look out and see thousands of faces. But I also recognize that's mostly just my ego speaking. And that's me getting as close to being Justin Timberlake as I'll ever be. But I also really do appreciate those smaller groups. And that's awesome, one of the things that's cool about this podcast. I have no idea if 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, or 100,000 people will listen to this conversation that we just had. And it doesn't matter because I always want to make sure that I'm delivering value to at least one person. And it's the same thing with speaking. My ego would love there to be 1,000 people in the seats. But if there's only 10, I'm still going to give those 10 my heart and my soul, and I'm going to give them the best that I'm capable of. One of the things that I learned through HPS is you speak to the people that are in the room. You don't worry about the people that chose not to be in the room. And to me, that's what's most important.
Totally. Well, I can assure you that the number of people listening to this episode is not 10.
Okay.
And it's not 100,000. So it's somewhere in between.
I like it. 952,000. I'm in.
Exactly. I'll let you know when the episode releases. I'll keep you updated on that, Alan. Where can the audience find you and connect with you? Whether they want to book you as a speaker, they read your book, see your funny GIFs on Facebook, or the things you do on Instagram. Where can people connect with you? Or as you said, if you're amicably divorced, if they want to connect with you on perhaps, I don't know, dating apps, whatever.
I love it. Now
I'm always looking to hook my guests up.
Yes, you are. Man, you get me dates and speaking engagements and book sales. This is awesome. That's the trifecta. So if folks are interested in anything I do from a speaking standpoint, or that type of content, you can just go to alansteinjr.com. And I'm also at Alan Stein Jr. on the major social platforms. If you have any interest in my book, Raise Your Game, you can go to raiseyourgamebook.com. I have a podcast called The Raise Your Game Show, which is in alignment with the book. So I do my best to be easily found, but most importantly, easily approachable and accessible, so that if anyone listening to this, if something struck a chord, if you've got a question, if there was something you liked, if there was something you disagree with, by all means, drop me a line, hit me up on social. I would love to continue the dialogue. Yeah.
I mean, it only took me, I think, 4 press agents, your agent, your speaking agent, to actually get you on the podcast. So it only took 3 or 4 months. It wasn't too bad.
And I've actually got to tighten that up. I can't believe you got in so easily. So
it was tough.
Somehow, and you can't see them. They're slightly off webcam right here, but I have 2 massive bodyguards that are standing here just in case anybody decides to knock on the door to my penthouse apartment here. They're not going to be able to get through. I've seen awesome
videos of you speaking. You've got the 2 big bodyguards on each side of the stage to make sure people don't bum rush. They like autographs. Yeah,
it's amazing how many people try to rush the stage whenever I'm done speaking. They're like, I've never had anyone share leadership lessons like that. You filled my bucket like no one else. I mean, I'm a rock star. And the hardest part about being a rock star is, since I still fly Southwest, I have to book tickets for both of my bodyguards on Southwest because I'm not quite flying private yet. But
we'll get close. You get there.
We'll get there.
Awesome, Alan. Well, thank you so much for being on today. Last thing, tradition on the show, words of wisdom. And the words of wisdom from you or from somebody that you admire, just make sure you attribute them appropriately. And the words of wisdom should fit on, for the older crowd, a Post-it note, and for the social media crowd, which you and I are both on social media, fit on an Instagram post, not the text part of it, but the picture part of it. So what words of wisdom would you like to leave the audience and myself with today?
I'm not going to credit myself as being the original author, but I also don't know where I heard this first, or I would give them proper attribution. But one of my favorite quotes is one of the simplest, but it's also one of the deepest. And that's, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Which means if you want to actually have a change in your life, then you need to make a change. If you want a different result at the end of 2020, then you need to become a different person by the end of 2020. And you do that by self-development, filling your own bucket, doing all of the things that we talked about today. But just know, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you will keep getting what you've been getting. And if you don't like what you've been getting, you better change what you've been doing.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Alan. It was an absolute pleasure to connect with you, have you on today. And I wish you the best in everything you're up to.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.